And so here we are. How many years has it been since you left? How many years have you been away from the highway patrol?
Oh man, I'm thinking 10 or 11.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, I think.
I've lost track, but it's been a while.
So I look at you now, and I see you have created this whole, not new you, but a whole different part of you. It's almost like at that point you just split off into this whole other finding yourself. And
I did, yeah.
Trying to find your passion and what the heck were you going to do? How did that process work? I mean, did you right away go find someone to talk to, or in hindsight maybe you should have, or did you just shove everything behind you and just say, I don't want to think about it? Or what was
I
the
wish
process?
I had, but I wasn't into asking for help or talking to people or reaching out to people. I didn't even know how. I don't think I'd ever done that in my life, so far. I was 40-something, and I had no idea how to reach out for help. So I figured, I'm so used to doing everything on my own, I'm just going to figure out a way to do it. And it was hard. I mean, I didn't really have a life that I really wanted. I still felt like I was floundering, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. But I did. I got out there and I tried different things. I became an administration of justice teacher for 1.5 years, and then I hated it. So I went back to school and I learned how to do web design, which I loved. Oh, yeah. But, other things got in the way. And then I finally did, things happened in my life that I thought I was okay, but I figured out that I had just been avoiding, avoiding dealing with all these horrible feelings of loss and anxiety, and they were just coming up in different ways, me being anxious and scared and pretty much about everything. So I did finally talk to somebody, and that just made a huge difference in my life. I realized, wait, the way I've been dealing with all these things, I knew it would, part of me knew in the back of my head that it would come back to bite me, as far as, just putting off dealing with things, making myself extra busy. Like right after John died, I decided I'm going to buy a house, fix it up, and flip it. I thought, that's a great idea. I still have a full-time career, and I'm a single parent of a 2-year-old, but I'm just going to go and do that so I don't have to think about anything. And it worked. I did the same thing for years, kept myself so busy that I didn't really have time to think about, my life, disappointments, how I dealt with things, and I would have an increasing anxiety. Every year, my anxiety level would just get higher and higher. And I ended up making some poor decisions, and I finally saw somebody, talk to them for, 2 years. And I figured out, man, I have just been avoiding, my life, my feelings, everything. And then my life turned around.
You were still grieving.
Oh, yeah, I was. And I thought, who on earth would still be grieving, 13 years later? Shouldn't I be over it? But since I didn't deal with everything then, it's going to come back to you, and you're going to have to deal with it eventually.
Right.
And I thought I didn't have to. I thought I could just avoid it, I avoided all bad things. For a while, I avoided paying bills. I avoided, being in my house. I think for 10 years, I didn't like to be alone in my house.
Yeah.
Which it's hard to keep up with things. Like Debbie, I think I think you came over at some point and saw, oh my gosh, Coleen, you have so much stuff. And, every room would be filled with stuff that I'd never get to.
Yeah.
I forgot what was there. I mean, my whole life was kind of like that.
Yeah.
Getting things, putting them away, but not really dealing with them. So I think that all changed for me. And now I feel like, wow, I'm excited about my life. Now, it took a long time and a lot of work, and I'm sure it's not over, because bad habits are hard, to break. You find yourself reverting into them.
Yeah.
Like, I'll still get telephone calls where the call, I'll see, and I'm like, I'm kind of scared to answer it.
Yeah.
I still feel those little things, but then I make myself. I'm like, wait, what's worse that can happen? I answer it, and it's, some random thing. I'm like, wow, I'm glad I answered that, because I really needed to, to deal with my life now. And now I feel like I can actually live again. I don't feel completely filled with anxiety about what's going to happen next. My daughter's a senior in high school and she's going to go off to college. And man, when she was 5, I was already terrified about that date because she was my whole life. And now I'm like, okay, I'm figuring out how to have her not be the only part of my life. So it's, I'm making choices that make me happy. I'm taking Spanish so I can travel. I'm taking ukulele lessons because I still love music, and ukulele is really easy. And I'm playing pickleball 3 times a week, and surrounding myself with people that I like, and reaching out to them. Which I've never been able to do before. It was always I can do everything myself. Can't depend on anyone.
Yeah. I want to back up a little bit to something that Deb and I both learned from Reverend Deborah Johnson, Inner Light, is that grief has no time frame, and it's individual to the person experiencing it. And so this idea of a 3-day bereavement is nonsense, and even 4 months for some people it's nonsense. For some people can deal with it, bounce back. They may have a different understanding of death, and different ways to grieve. And so I think departments need to really work with people depending on the individual.
Right, and there really is with law enforcement a stigma about needing emotional help and support. That, when anyone makes a stress claim, they're looked down upon. People come up with their own stories. What the heck does that person, have to be stressed about? And really, we don't know anyone else's stories. We don't know what's going on. I remember being shocked. I thought I wasn't grieving anymore after maybe 3 or 4 years. I thought, okay, I think I'm doing pretty well. But it took a good 5 years before somebody told me, you look really different now. For the last 4 years, it looked like and I had no idea because they didn't tell me this, but you look like a different person. Like you just weren't, maybe all there, or it could tell that you weren't your same self. And that was kind of a shock to hear that for 5 years, I was like that, and they noticed a change in me 5 years later. Thinking, wow, maybe it takes an outsider to notice those kind of things. When you're living it yourself, it's harder to see.
Yeah, it is.
And I think also my generation, and I would include yours in that, since your parents seem to be from the same mold that mine were from, is that you didn't, you got back to work, get back on the horse, get going, don't sit there and wallow in your sadness. And, that whole mentality of, first of all, not ever admitting that there's any kind of mental health issue happening, and neglecting your own feelings. And so that was ingrained in me. And talk about grieving, I didn't know how to grieve. I had never had an example of grieving because I never saw my parents grieve for anything, even their own marriage. I just, so I had no teacher. I had no template to go through it, and no one was willing to talk about it. And I wasn't willing. I didn't want to ask because I didn't want to seem weak or ignorant. And I wanted to be like everybody else. Well, let's just move through 3 days, move back to work, and that doesn't work. And 3 days is ridiculous.
It doesn't. Yeah. I knew that I needed some help, and I remember taking a class for new widows, and there was 5 of us in Santa Cruz County, and it was amazingly helpful, but it only lasted 5 weeks. I'm like, man, if I had done this, or if it was an ongoing class for a year or 2, what wonders that would have done. I mean, 5 weeks, it just wasn't enough once a week. But I realize now how helpful that was. But a lot of people didn't even know. I think I had somebody let me know about that class. But if I hadn't, I think my grief would have been put back even farther.
Mm-hmm.
So would you, now I'm forward thinking, like, wow, so how could we help people grieving like that? Was there a therapist involved in the group, or was it just people getting together and talking?
There was a therapist.
Okay. So
Yeah, and
so
she had training to deal with it.
maybe in like, wow, what would be helpful for someone would be once a week or twice a week class on grieving.
That would be helpful. I'm remembering, I know when John died, there was a debriefing held at the CHP office that I found out about later. And I thought, man, I wish I could have attended it.
Mm.
Obviously, I realize now that would have been way too soon.
Yeah.
But when Mike Walker died and we had the debriefing, that was really helpful. But it was one day, obviously less than a day. It was a couple hours, and you only reach the outpouring of feelings right then. But it's not, I mean, it doesn't end there. So even though that was helpful, it's not like you can get all those emotions out and then, okay, next day you carry on with your life and it's up, because that's kind of what they expected you to do. So if there could be follow-ups where, I'm not sure how often, but maybe once a month, a follow-up to see how everyone is progressing through it.
Yeah. So
that things don't spiral out of control.
I think it would be a big benefit if the stigma was just released, where people felt free to talk about it on this job or not.
Or felt free to cry in front of someone else.
Yeah.
That was a huge thing. I remember, I'm not sure if it was John's or Mike's debriefing, but my throat hurt so bad after because I was holding in crying because I was not going to cry in front of my workmates. I just wasn't going to do it. And because why? Well, it looks weak, and if they're not, the guys aren't going to cry, I'm not crying. And I mean, of course, I can't control that there are tears coming out, but I'm not. Had I had my way, I would have full on been sobbing. Both of those, and just again shoved it all down. Move forward, business as usual. And again, like you said, it's going to rear. It's coming back. It will come back.
Oh, for sure.
And it's going to come when you don't want it to the most.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it sounds like you're saying that maybe get help sooner than later.
Right. Yeah. And it wasn't that I didn't, like, I was offered help somebody, and the Highway Patrol suggested, okay, here is somebody you can talk to that could be helpful. And I don't think I was ready to talk. So I actually kind of dreaded going to talk. Every once in a while, it was good and I liked it. But I found if I had a once a week appointment and I had to think about it ahead of time, thinking, okay, what am I going to talk about? I can't just sit there and be silent. There was so much kind of turmoil where I should have had plenty. Yeah. Whereas when I went years later, I realized I can't stop talking. I don't have to. I enjoy going, and I don't have to worry about what I'm going to talk to because something's going to come up because I feel like I can talk. Where back then, even though I had the offer of help, I really didn't think it was helping me. I don't think I knew how to use it. I don't think I had the skills. I didn't grow up in a family that ever talked about anything. We showed no emotion. There was no hugging, physical contact, no talking about our feelings. So that was probably one of the reasons why I had no idea what to do. With the therapist, somebody willing to talk to me and help me through. Right. I just didn't know what to do with it. So I'm not sure how to solve that problem. I mean, I think a lot of people, especially men, women, I think a lot of times they'll grow up and it's okay to talk about your feelings and stuff. But a lot of the law enforcement are male, and I don't think they have had that as much.
Would you think would be helpful is maybe at the academy have an emotional survival class or something to talk about, emotions, and this is what's, you're going to see these things start to happen to you, shutting down your humanity, to see the scenes that you're going to see that are graphically you can't even think
cannot
of
prepare
how
for.
horrible they're going to be until you're in it. Some kind of class to prepare you not only for that, but the loss of a workmate when a fellow officer is killed. I mean, for you it was so personal because it was your husband, but for those of us, when you're in a police environment, it's like a combat kind of thing. You have to trust your beat partner is going to be there, is going to help you, going to do the right thing. So there's a closeness there that's not in your insurance company working in the office kind of thing. There's a closeness, a bond that comes between officers that is so tight. It's like family members. And when an officer is killed, that's a family member, and you have to prepare for it, because when you see that coworker in their uniform in that casket, it does something. It does something at a core level that I can't even express, and I wasn't prepared for it at all. But they took us to the fountain. They did it to you guys. I mean, stand there and we polished at the fountain of the Highway Patrol Academy. Around it is every officer that's ever been killed is on a brass plaque.
Oh.
And the cadets there, I think it's every Wednesday, go out in a very solemn ceremony, and you stand in front of a plaque and you shine it every week.
Wow.
And they say, I don't want to see your name on this fountain.
Mm-hmm.
And Matthew Lindholm was my PT instructor, and he took us out there and had a really solemn speech. It was right at the very beginning, like 5 o'clock in the morning. We're standing there, and he briefly talks about it, but it didn't prepare me for the emotions that I was going to be exposed to that I just shoved down because I didn't know. So maybe a course at the academy in that. Do you think that would be helpful?
It sounds like it would be incredibly helpful, although thinking about it, I can't see it the way the culture is now ever having it, because in a way, I remember going every Wednesday, shining those names, and for me, I had dealt with my husband's roommate in the academy, died, Sean Nava. So there was a little bit of, okay, somebody that sort of has to die before you can realize that, wait, this really does happen, where just polishing the names, it doesn't really get through to you, because in a way you have to, in order to do law enforcement, you have to believe that you're invincible, that that's not going to happen to you. Who's going to sign up for a job where at any moment, you could be shot? So that when somebody does die, it brings up not only feelings of loss for them, but kind of for you, questioning your job. Wait, this happened to somebody I was working with yesterday. This could happen to me. This is my job, where I really am. It could happen, to anybody. And I think for the Santa Cruz office, it was so devastating to have 2 losses, where before that, the last person that died, in the Highway Patrol was 1956 or, quite a few, 30 years before that. And to have 2 die in a row, it just really does. It brings out the stress and anxiety, not only for the officers, but for their spouses, for their family, because they realize, it's something that you almost can't think about to survive on the job. But you have to for your mental health when the inevitable does happen. Sort of a catch-22, I'm guessing. But something has to change.
Yeah. Right. Well, then, and Earl Scott.
And Earl Scott.
Earl Scott was the officer he broke in Santa Cruz, well-liked, and went out to Modesto, I think was his office. Modesto or Stockton out there somewhere, and he was murdered on a traffic stop. And young man, his dad was a sergeant. His dad lived in, I'm calling it Prune-tucky, but that's not. Prunedale. Prunedale, sorry. And that happened, I don't even remember. It was such a blur. I think it happened right after Mike Walker?
Within 6 months, I think, maybe even sooner than
And
that.
a lot of his training officers were still there. The Corps
Yeah.
officers were still there, and it really did take it home. Like, wow, this is the real thing. I could get killed at any time out there, and just not even dealing with the grief of it all, but the hidden anxiety of, maybe overreacting a little bit. Something's not right on this traffic stop. Now my hand is on my gun. Now my gun's halfway out of the holster. Yeah, nothing really is warranting me pulling this gun out. But I'm so over anxious.
Hypervigilant, yeah.
I'm hypervigilant, and it's nonstop because 3 people I know very closely have been killed.
Right.
And one in a really violent, on purpose, someone purposely killed him. So that it was scaring me, and I wasn't scared I was scared of what I might do and overreacting. And you hear these horrible stories of these officers overreacting. It was a cell phone, it was a wallet. And now we see, out in the world, now because everyone has a cell phone, everyone is recording, you're seeing these things that officers are doing, and oftentimes I'll hear from regular people like, oh, how could they have done that? And it's like, you have no idea.
Yeah,
you have
they
no
can't
idea.
understand.
They can't until you have lived it. And I'm not making excuses for those officers. A lot of those things should not have happened. All of them shouldn't have happened. And if you can see the life of an officer, you can understand a little better how that could happen.
And it strikes me a little weird just thinking about it now that the Highway Patrol goes to great lengths to make sure that they hire people, since they're giving them a gun and a lot of power, that they are sane. For one thing, you go through a psychological exam, and the questions, the 300 questions where you have to take a written test just to make sure you're not crazy. But the stress of the job, after you're hired, after a psychologist tells you, okay, you're saying you can handle this job, after the stresses of the job and losing people can cause a lot of emotional scarring, pain, problems, there's nothing afterwards. So, okay, you pass the test to get into the Highway Patrol, but now there is nothing once you're there to make sure you stay sensible and calm and get emotional help, because it is such a stressful job where I think, Debbie, you told me the number one job as far as suicides are concerned is law enforcement.
Yeah, the number one cause of death in law enforcement is suicide.
Exactly. And there's
surprise
got to
you?
be,
It surprised
definitely.
me.
And there's got to be something because of all these stresses and pressures that everyone goes through. It's fine that you started off being psychologically able to start the career. It doesn't mean that you're not going to need refresher courses. We took refresher courses on everything. I mean, every year, EMT, we have to recertify. We have to recertify on, hazardous spills. And it just seems
gun
like
qualification.
Yes, you'd have to maybe.
Physical tactics,
Exactly.
everything. Yeah. And like, what's wrong with like mental health maintenance? Because
Especially
the job is
career.
so traumatizing. Even if you never have to draw your gun on somebody, you're going to see and do things that are going to traumatize you.
Exactly.
And even, from my entire career being inside a jail, I saw in stuff that traumatized me. Stopping a suicide in progress and responding to a completed suicide, and then go to work the next day and listening to the demeaning jokes in the briefing room. That kind of, that's, I mean, it pales in comparison, but it depends on the individual,
And there are so many of those events that not everyone realizes how traumatic or how long-lasting effects they can have. I mean, I remember being really lucky as far as not seeing or being part of or investigating a lot of horrific scenes, but just this one time, as me and my partner are driving down, we see a fire, and somebody's waving us down for help, and we get out, and there's an 8-year-old child that has been burned. And we're trying to keep the child alive, and we're thinking, it's not something you come across every day. We're not firefighters or paramedics. We've been trained in EMT, but I almost never took my EMT bag out. And to realize or hear the next day that this child died, I mean, it's absolutely devastating.
Yeah.
Even though, you can't blame yourself. It was nothing you had done, but just to see things like that. And I know other people had it a lot
And with
worse.
that training, we know what burns do to a person, like how incredibly painful they can be. Right. And, you think what that child must have gone through.
How do you deal with that? There wasn't a class in that,
Right.
And I still, it's acute stress disorder is one thing, but the other thing is PTSD. And even if you haven't seen a horrific thing, you can still suffer the results of PTSD.
Yeah.
And what do you do with that? The department, it's one thing, the department and their admin, they say, well, here's your help and you can get this, but your coworkers, the people that you work with, and the stigma behind it, I didn't want anyone to know I was struggling, because I wanted to maintain this level of, well, you can trust me, I have your back, I'm a good officer, but man, I was falling apart. And didn't know what to do with it. And luckily, my partner, Ruth, told me, yeah, you need some help. And I'm like, oh, yeah. But she's like, no, you need some serious help. And then found this fantastic therapist and got help. And it's not like, I'm all done with that. Oh boy, it feels so great, and go on with it, because I have to continually come back to that. And the good thing about that is it's going to come back, but I have tools now that I can use that I didn't have before.
Right.
And I think that's the key, having these tools. And I think it would be great if departments could offer these real tools instead of, they kind of like brush their hands and, dust it off by saying, well, here's your, what is it, where they give you the 5 free...
Right, the EOP maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
5 free visits or something like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, okay, poof, we took care of that. We just send them to the therapist, and we don't have to deal with it. But I think it's so deep now that the departments do need something. Like their Amy Trittenbaugh, Amy Trittenbaugh? They have something that's called the peer support team.
Right.
So when an officer involved shooting or something really traumatic, officers killed, these officers who are on the road normally are called off the road, and they've had training, and they come into the office and they are there for support. They take you in a quiet room if you want to talk to them. And so that is something that they're doing.
That's good.
And
that's really good, because I always felt isolated. So I was lucky and blessed enough to find outside help, find tools that completely changed my trajectory. Completely changed it. So yeah, tools are very, very important.
Coleen, if you could give one piece of advice to, whether it's a wife of a law enforcement officer that's struggling, or someone that you, a sister or brother, somebody, and you see that, wow, they're just not the same. What would you do? How would you approach it? And you look at it and go, wow, there's something. This is not the person that I know. What would you say to do? What would be your advice?
Boy,
so like you know, tough. It is tough.
I remember when we both went over to see Michelle Walker after Mike Walker died, and I'm thinking, how do I help this person? Trying to deal with it yourself was one thing, but trying to say the right thing and offer the right support and advice to someone else, even if we've been through it before, really difficult, I think. I think the one thing that I learned from all this is don't be scared to reach out, even though it is a scary thing, especially in the highway patrol where people aren't, necessarily they don't really want to be reminded that it's such a dangerous job, and what has happened to you or your loved one can happen to them. I mean, they kind of want to keep you at a distance because you are a constant reminder. So to still reach out in spite of that, to still make sure, call somebody if you know someone or even don't know them that well. If you could just reach out once a month. I had a friend do that, and it was really... Every month she would call me, and we hadn't talked a lot before that, just to make sure, see how I'm doing, make sure I'm okay, so it doesn't get, so far that there's no coming back, that they just go downhill. But I think more importantly, if CHP officers could all get some of these tools that you and I have both learned from therapy or from taking classes, if everyone had these tools, they'd be able to share with others and, help others get through these kind of things. But it's tough to come up with how to help others, even if you've gone through it yourself.
It's uncomfortable, for one, because you think, wow, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I want to say the right thing.
Right.
And one of the things I've learned is that you don't have to say anything at all. Just showing up with a cup of coffee and a snack, and sit down and just be available to just listen, and not even offer advice, but just to really
sit there with them.
to see them and to hear them. And I know that when John died, I thought about you a lot, but I was so afraid. It's like, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do.
Exactly.
And I was struggling with my own mortality when John died, because I never let it occur to me that can happen to me. And it was a traffic accident. And, I drive that same ramp all the time. I chase people. It's like, wow, one little boo-boo, one little thing you can't control, a tire goes flat, and it's all over. And I thought, well, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And so I was going by the graveyard, and I was going to stop by John's grave before he had a headstone, and I would put flowers in there. And there's a really funny story that goes with that, but this isn't one of them. But I go and I'm driving out, and I see you there. And I'm like, oh shoot, I don't want to intrude on this moment you're having there. And I'm like, but I don't know. I just took a chance. I thought, well, I'm just going to go. And we didn't even talk. We sat there and we cried. And that was the first time I really cried after that happened. And that was it. We didn't even really talk. We just cried, and then we went on our way. Right. And that was so cathartic for me. So just that in itself,
right.
I didn't have to say anything. Words weren't necessary. It was just a grief that needed to be expressed with someone else, because it's a different process when you're alone grieving, but when there's somebody sitting with you and
exactly.
You're hugging each other, there's that connection that makes a big difference. It helped me a lot. But,
and the grief of others is scary. I mean, I know that because it was hard for me to take my daughter to the graveyard. I mean, I used to kind of want to avoid it. Because when you're sitting right there, is she going to say something that's going to make me cry? Will me crying scare her? I mean, there's so many things that go on, because grief, when you're around grief in others, it's a frightening thing.
I think just sitting and witnessing is a huge gift to the person who's grieving. If I'd had that when my dad died, I think it would have made a big difference for me. And I was socialized a lot like a boy, because I was a tomboy, but the boys would tease me a lot, and especially my brother. So if I cried, I learned really early not to cry. And I didn't cry at my dad's funeral. I didn't let anyone in my family see me cry. So I would pull the blankets over my head at night, and put the pillow over my head and cry. That wasn't a good thing.
No. But, you're socialized like that. And I really do feel for men, because it's such a weak thing for them to do is to show emotion that's other than anger. Anger's accepted.
Yeah.
But any kind of grief or feeling,
Yeah.
touchy-feely,
Emotions.
compassion, forget it. And I think that's a society thing. I don't think it's necessarily a cop thing. It's just
No,
the
it's
way
society.
society is. And I'm
Yeah.
hoping that it's changing with the hipsters. I don't know.
It is. I'm seeing it change, which is really good.
Well, I think for my daughter, I tried to show her as much emotion as I could to say it's okay to be like this. It's
Yeah.
and would sit and just listen to her. And I had always thought if I started crying, I would never be able to stop. And I told the therapist that, and she's like, "Well, you need to." And I'm like, "No, if I start, I won't be able to stop. That's my fear, that I will lose it. I'll be in a hospital because I can't stop crying." And she's like, "I guarantee you that you will stop crying. Your body can't physically produce tears that long." And so I let it happen. And the first place I let it happen was in therapy, in a safe place. Because if it had been any place else, I couldn't have done it. And that was another step to my healing of my own emotional stuffing things down, was that, I don't like to cry, period, even by myself. But it's something I have to say, no, it's cathartic, because I always feel better. It's like somebody took a big wet blanket off my shoulders. But boy, just getting myself to do it is just huge. So here, I'll tell you, I think you know what happened, but I would take flowers. I felt such survival guilt, and I don't understand it, and I still don't really. When John died, and I would go to this florist over on 7th Avenue and take flowers to his grave. And then I'd come like 2 days later, and the stalks would be there, but the flowers were gone. And I'm like, what the hell? So I tell the workers there, and they don't speak hardly any English, and I'm trying to express, and so they bring their supervisor off. I'm like, "Oh, who's coming out here and destroying his flowers?" Oh, and he's like, and he starts laughing, and I'm like, "How dare you laugh?" And he's like, "It's the deer. They love carnations. Boy, that's their favorite. So you take carnations out here, they are going to be chomping down it." So that's when I caught it, because like, oh. So then I would go get the artificial flowers and put them on there and try to make sure.
But those deer,
Oh, they were happy for a while.
they were a little sad when they tried to nibble on that plastic.
Yeah, so that was. Well, I love your story, and finding out more about you is really interesting, because I thought, oh, I know Coleen's story, but I didn't. And when we talked the other night, I was like, so much I didn't know about you, and I just think you have done an outstanding job. And, Sarah seems to be thriving, and you seem to be thriving. And I just want you to know that I really have a lot of respect for you, and the journey that you have made, and the willingness to talk about it. And that takes a lot of courage. And so I commend you for being so courageous and allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And thank you.
And in general, I hate talking. I hate talking. Unless it's, with a friend that I trust. But otherwise, I don't, I always fear that I was brought up to not talk, keep all my secrets, so nobody finds out about any of the skeletons in our closet or how I grew up differently from everyone else. So it's an adjustment trying to talk and share things that have happened, but it always feels better, and each time I think it's easier.
Well, I want to thank you, because we just met. I want to acknowledge you for that, and really thank you. It's a service.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we'll bring this episode to a close, and Cassandra, would you like to add anything at the end of our show?
Absolutely. Stay safe, everybody.